The sun hung like a brass button in the sky, beating down mercilessly on the Carter ranch. Red dust swirled in lazy devils across the yard, coating everything in a fine layer of grit that seemed to seep into a man's very soul. This was Wyoming territory. 1873, where the law was what a man could enforce with his Colt .45, and civilization was little more than a distant dream whispered by Eastern newspapers. Eli Carter stood on the porch of the main house, squinting against the glare as he watched his father's men drive the last of the cattle into the holding pens. At 28, he cut an imposing figure, broad shoulders earned from years of ranch work, hands calloused from rope and leather, face weathered beyond his years by sun and wind. His dark hair hung just past his collar, and his gray eyes held a hardness that spoke of too much seen too young. "That's the last of 'em, boss," called out Jake Morrison, the foreman, spurring his mount toward the house. Dust billowed from the horse's hooves as it skidded to a stop. 3,000 head, give or take, should fetch a pretty penny come drive time. Eli nodded, not trusting himself to speak. The cattle meant nothing to him, just another number in his father's ledger. Another reason for the old man to crow about the Carter Empire. Samuel Carter had built this ranch from nothing, carved it out of hostile land with blood, sweat, and more than a few bullets. Now it sprawled across 40,000 acres, the largest spread in 3 counties. "Your PA inside?" Jake asked, dismounting with a groan. The man was pushing 50, his body showing the wear of decades in the saddle. "Where else would he be?" Eli's voice came out rougher than intended. "Counting his money, probably, or writing letters to them railroad men back east." Jake spat tobacco juice into the dust. "Can't fault a man for being successful." "No," Eli agreed, though the word tasted bitter. "Can't fault him for that. Success, that's what his father called it. Never mind that Martha Carter lay 6 feet under in the family plot, dead these 10 years from the fever. Never mind that Eli's younger brother Thomas had caught a Confederate bullet at Gettysburg, leaving nothing but a memory and a folded flag. Success didn't bring back the dead or fill the empty chairs at the dinner table. Eli turned and headed inside, leaving Jake to tend to his horse. The house was grand by frontier standards, 2 stories of hewn logs and imported glass windows, with real wooden floors instead of packed earth. His mother had insisted on those floors, said a proper home needed proper floors. Samuel had grumbled about the expense but given in, as he always did where Martha was concerned. The interior was dark and cool after the blazing sun. Eli found his father in the study, bent over his account books, gray hair gleaming in the lamplight. At 55, Samuel Carter remained a formidable man, though age had begun to stoop his shoulders and line his face. 3,000 head, Eli reported, not bothering with pleasantries. They'd given up on those years ago. Samuel looked up, his blue eyes sharp as winter ice. 3,012, to be exact. You'd know that if you paid attention to the tallies. The dozen won't make much difference when the Sioux come calling. His father's jaw tightened. The Sioux are beaten. The Army couldn't find its backside with both hands and a map. Eli moved to the window, staring out at the vast expanse of their land. Red Cloud may have signed their papers, but there's plenty of young bucks who don't recognize treaty lines. Then we'll deal with them as we always have. Samuel's voice held the cold certainty of a man who'd never met a problem he couldn't solve with money or lead. Eli said nothing. What was the point? His father saw the world in columns of numbers, in acres owned and cattle raised. He didn't see the loneliness that ate at a man's soul out here. Didn't feel the weight of all that empty space pressing down like a physical thing. "There's a church social in town Saturday," Samuel said abruptly. "You'll attend." "I will not. You're 28 years old. Eli, it's past time you took a wife. Gave me grandchildren to carry on the Carter name." The words hung in the air like a challenge. Eli turned slowly, meeting his father's gaze, like Thomas was supposed to. Something flickered in Samuel's eyes, pain, maybe, or just anger. "Thomas is dead. You're not..." The living have obligations to fulfill. My obligation is to this ranch, nothing more. The ranch needs an heir. Then you'd best get to work on that yourself. Eli headed for the door. I hear the Widow Perkins is still available. Eli. But he was already gone, boots thundering on his mother's proper floors as he strode through the house and back into the merciless sun. He needed air, needed space, needed to be anywhere but under his father's calculating gaze. The barn beckoned, dark and familiar. Eli saddled his horse, a rangy black gelding named Lucifer that no one else dared ride, and headed out across the range. The wind picked up as he rode, carrying the scent of sage and distant rain. Storm coming, maybe they could use the water. He rode without destination, letting Lucifer pick the path. The mountains loomed to the west, purple shadows in the afternoon haze. To the east, the prairie stretched endlessly, a sea of brown grass rippling in the wind. This was his inheritance, his burden, all this land that meant everything to his father and nothing to him. The town of Willow Creek lay 5 miles north of the ranch, a collection of wooden buildings huddled around a dirt main street like survivors of some natural disaster. Eli hadn't planned to go there, but Lucifer seemed inclined toward civilization, and Eli didn't much care one way or the other. As towns went, Willow Creek wasn't much a general store, a saloon, a church, a blacksmith, and a scattering of houses, maybe 300 souls all told, scratching out lives on the edge of nowhere, the kind of place that would blow away in a strong wind and nobody back east would ever know it had existed. Eli tied Lucifer to the hitching post outside Murphy's general store, more out of habit than any real need for supplies. The interior was dim and cluttered, shelves stacked with everything from flour to ammunition. Old Murphy himself dozed behind the counter, white whiskers trembling with each snore. "Help you?" The voice was soft, feminine. Eli turned to find a young woman standing near the fabric display, arms full of calico. She couldn't have been more than 19 or 20, with honey-colored hair pulled back in a simple bun and eyes the color of prairie sky. Her dress was plain brown homespun, carefully mended in several places. "Just looking," Eli said, his voice coming out rougher than intended. She nodded, turning back to her fabrics. Something about the careful way she moved, the way she kept her eyes downcast, marked her as one of the town's respectable girls, the kind who attended church socials and married shopkeepers' sons. Mary Whitfield. Murphy had woken, his voice creaking like old leather. "You got everything you need?" "Yes, Mr. Murphy." She approached the counter, setting down her selections. "Put it on our account, please." Murphy's face went careful, the way men's faces did when money was tight. "Your pa's account is getting mighty long, Miss Mary. Don't suppose. We'll settle up after harvest." Her chin lifted slightly, pride warring with embarrassment. "Papa's good for it." Eli knew that look, had seen it on too many faces over the years. Pride was about all some folks had out here, and they'd cling to it even as their world crumbled around them. "Let me," he heard himself say, pulling out his wallet. Both Mary and Murphy turned to stare. Mary's cheeks flushed pink. "That's not necessary, Mr. Carter, Eli Carter." He laid money on the counter, more than enough to cover the fabric and then some. "Consider it a gift. We don't take charity." Her voice had gone cold, proper. The pride was winning now. "Not charity, investment." Eli met her gaze, seeing the steel beneath the softness. "Your PA farms the old Swenson place. Doesn't he good bottomland? He'll make that harvest." It was a lie. Mostly, the Swenson place was hardscrabble at best, and everyone knew it. But the lie let her keep her pride, and that seemed important somehow. Mary studied him for a long moment, those prairie sky eyes seeing more than he'd like. Then she nodded, just once. "Thank you, Mr. Carter. I'll see that you're repaid." She gathered her purchases and left, back straight as a rifle barrel. Eli watched her go. something stirring in his chest that he didn't care to examine too closely. "That was kind of you," Murphy said, pocketing the money. "The Whitfields have had a hard run. Her ma died last winter, and her PA, well, John Whitfield means well, but meaning well don't bring in crops." Eli grunted, already regretting the impulse. He didn't need entanglements, didn't need to be drawn into other people's struggles. He had enough of his own. Outside, the promised storm was building on the horizon, black clouds piling up like cotton bales. The wind had turned cold, carrying the metallic scent of rain. Lucifer danced nervously as Eli mounted, eager to be moving. He should head back to the ranch. There was work to be done, always work. But something made him pause, looking down the street to where Mary Whitfield was climbing into a weathered wagon. She moved carefully, as if the world might break if she wasn't gentle with it. Lightning flickered in the distance. Thunder rumbled, low and ominous. The storm would hit hard when it came, the way storms did out here, all fury and violence, washing away everything that wasn't anchored deep. Eli turned Lucifer toward home, but his thoughts remained in town, circling around a pair of prairie sky eyes and the careful pride in a young woman's voice. Complications. That's what those thoughts were. And if there was one thing Eli Carter didn't need in his life, it was complications. The rain started as he reached the ranch, fat drops that turned to sheets within minutes. He barely made it to the barn before the full fury hit, thunder crashing overhead like artillery fire. As he unsaddled Lucifer, Eli found himself thinking about the Whitfield place, about whether their roof would hold in weather like this. Not his problem, not his concern. He had 40,000 acres and 3,000 head of cattle to worry about. He didn't have time for honey-haired girls with too much pride and not enough money. But as he ran through the rain to the house, as he sat through another silent dinner with his father, as he lay in his bed listening to the storm rage outside, Eli couldn't shake the memory of her voice, the way she'd said his name like she was testing its weight. Investment, he'd called it. Maybe that's all it was. Or maybe, just maybe, it was the first crack in the wall he'd built around himself, the first sign that the loneliness might not last forever. The storm passed near midnight, leaving the world washed clean and gleaming. From his window, Eli could see the moon riding high and silver above the mountains. Somewhere out there, in a shabby farmhouse with a leaking roof, Mary Whitfield was probably watching that same moon. Tomorrow would bring more work, more cattle, more of his father's expectations. But tonight, for just a moment, Eli Carter allowed himself to imagine a different life, one where pride and loneliness weren't the only things a man had to hold on to. It was a dangerous thought, as dangerous as any Sioux raiding party or rival rancher's ambition, because once a man started wanting more than what he had, once he started seeing possibilities instead of just obligations, there was no telling where it might lead. The moon continued its journey across the sky, indifferent to the hopes and fears of the humans below. And in his bed, Eli Carter stared at the ceiling and wondered what it would be like to not be alone. The October wind howled like a wounded animal, driving sand and grit against the walls of Eli's cabin. He'd built it himself 5 years back, a quarter-mile from the main house, far enough to claim some peace, close enough to satisfy his father's need for control. The single room was sparse but solid: a bed, a table, 2 chairs, and a stone fireplace that currently held the only light against the gathering darkness. Eli sat cleaning his rifle, the familiar ritual soothing after a long day checking fence lines. The storm outside was building into something fierce, the kind that could scatter cattle to hell and gone if a man wasn't careful. But the herds were secure. The hands knew their business, and for once, he could simply sit and listen to the wind. The knock, when it came, was so soft he almost missed it beneath the storm's fury. 3 tentative taps, barely audible. Eli froze, rifle half assembled in his hands. Nobody came to his cabin, not ever. It was understood among the ranch hands that this was his sanctuary, inviolate as a church. The knock came again. more urgent this time. Eli set down the rifle and moved to the door, every instinct screaming caution. Raiders wouldn't knock, but desperate men did desperate things in weather like this. He yanked open the door, ready for anything except what he found. Mary Whitfield stood on his doorstep, soaked through despite the heavy cloak she clutched around herself. Her honey-colored hair had come loose from its pins, hanging in wet strands around a face pale as moonlight. But it was her eyes that caught him wide and wild, with something between fear and determination. "Miss Whitfield." The words came out rough with surprise. "What in blazes are you doing out in this weather?" She opened her mouth to speak, then closed it again, seeming to struggle with the words. That's when Eli noticed she was trembling, and not just from the cold. "Come in," he said, stepping aside. "You'll catch your death standing there." She hesitated on the threshold. Propriety warring with necessity. A proper young lady didn't enter a man's quarters unchaperoned, especially at night. But then another gust of wind nearly knocked her sideways, and survival won out over scandal. She stumbled inside, and Eli shut the door against the storm. In the firelight, he could see her more clearly. Her dress was not just wet but torn at the hem, her boots caked with mud. She'd walked here, then, through the storm and the darkness. The Whitfield place was 3 miles away. 3 miles of rough country and weather that could kill. "Let me get you a blanket," Eli said, moving to the chest at the foot of his bed, "and something hot to drink." "I shouldn't be here." Her voice was barely above a whisper. "I'm sorry. I didn't know where else to go." Eli wrapped the blanket around her shoulders, trying not to notice how small she seemed, how young. "What's happened? Is it your father?" She shook her head, water droplets flying. "Papa's in town. He went to discuss business with Mr. Hartley at the bank." Eli knew what that meant. Hartley was a hard man who collected debts like some men collected scalps. If John Whitfield had gone to see him, things were worse than anyone had guessed. "Sit," he said, guiding her to one of the chairs by the fire. "I'll make coffee." His hands moved automatically through the familiar motions, water from the kettle, grounds in the pot. Everything set to boil. All the while, he was acutely aware of her presence, of how she seemed to fill up his small space in a way that had nothing to do with her physical size. "I wasn't spying," she said suddenly, the words tumbling out in a rush. "I mean, I was outside, looking, but not like that sounds." Eli turned from the fire, studying her face in the dancing light. "Looking for what?" Color flooded her cheeks despite her pallor. "I don't know. Something different, I suppose. Something that wasn't—" She gestured helplessly. "My life." He understood that feeling, the restlessness that came from being trapped in a role you never chose. But understanding didn't explain why she'd walked 3 miles through a killing storm to stand at his door. "I've watched you sometimes," she continued, her voice gaining strength. "In town, at the ranch when Papa delivered grain last season. You're different from the others. You don't swagger about like you own the world." "My father owns enough of it for both of us," Eli said dryly. A smile flickered across her face, there and gone like summer lightning. "But you don't act like it. You helped me at Murphy's, and you didn't make a show of it. Didn't make me feel small." The coffee was ready. Eli poured 2 cups, handed her one, then took the other chair. The storm raged outside, but inside, there was only the crackle of fire and the weight of unspoken things. "Why were you outside my door? Mary!" He used her given name deliberately, watching her reaction. She took a sip of coffee, winced at its strength, then met his gaze squarely. "Because I wanted to see how you live when no one's watching. Because I'm tired of only knowing people by their public faces. Because tomorrow Papa will come home and tell me I'm to marry Josiah Hartley's son to clear our debts. And I wanted one moment of choosing something for myself." The words hit Eli like a physical blow. Josiah Hartley's son was a mean-spirited drunk who'd inherit his father's cruelty along with his bank. The thought of Mary bound to such a man made something dark and possessive stir in Eli's chest. "You could refuse," he said, though they both knew the truth of that. "And watch Papa lose everything? Watch him break under the shame of it?" She shook her head. "I'm not that strong. You walked 3 miles through a storm that could have killed you. I'd say you're plenty strong." She looked at him then, really looked at him, and Eli felt exposed in a way that had nothing to do with propriety. There was something ancient in her gaze, something that recognized him at a level deeper than words. "Is that why you stay out here?" she asked softly. "In this cabin away from everyone, because you understand about cages." The question was too perceptive by half. Eli stood abruptly, moving to the window where rain lashed against the glass like desperate fingers. "You should go. I'll saddle a horse. Take you home before—" "Before someone notices I'm gone?" Mary stood too, the blanket falling from her shoulders. "It's too late for that, Mrs. Bradshaw saw me leave. By morning, the whole town will know I was out in the storm. They'll make their assumptions, and it won't matter what really happened." She was right, and they both knew it. In a place like Willow Creek, reputation was currency, and a young woman's reputation was the most fragile coin of all. Just by being here, she'd already crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. "What do you want from me, Mary?" The question came out rougher than he'd intended. She moved closer, close enough that he could smell the rain in her hair, see the pulse fluttering at her throat. "I want to know what it feels like to choose, just once before I become Mrs. Theodore Hartley, and choice becomes a luxury I can't afford." Eli turned to face her fully, seeing the determination beneath her fear, the steel beneath her softness. She was trembling again, but not from cold this time. She was balanced on the edge of something, and she was asking him to catch her if she fell. "This is dangerous," he said, his voice low and warning. "What you're suggesting—" "I'm not suggesting anything improper." But the color in her cheeks said otherwise. I want to talk to someone who might understand. I want to pretend, just for tonight, that I'm not John Whitfield's daughter with all that means. Is that so terrible?" Yes, Eli thought. It was terrible, because he could already feel the walls he'd built beginning to crack, could already sense the shape of the catastrophe waiting in the wings. But looking at her standing there in his cabin, rain-soaked and defiant, he found he didn't care. "Sit back down," he said finally. "Finish your coffee. When the storm breaks, I'll take you home, and we'll figure out what to tell people." Relief flickered across her face as she returned to her chair. They sat in silence for a moment, listening to the wind howl its frustrations against the walls. "Tell me about your mother," Mary said suddenly. "I remember her a little from when I was young. She had the kindest smile." Eli rarely spoke of his mother, but something about the firelight and the storm and Mary's presence loosened his tongue. He found himself talking about Martha Carter's laugh, about her love of wildflowers and her fear of thunderstorms. Mary listened with her whole being, occasionally offering her own memories of a mother lost too soon. The hours passed unmarked except by the gradual easing of the storm. They talked of everything and nothing, books they'd read, places they'd never see, dreams that seemed too fragile to survive the harsh light of day. And underneath it all was an awareness, electric as the lightning outside, of what they were really doing, building a connection that had no place in their world. "I should go," Mary said finally, though she made no move to rise. "Yes," Eli agreed, though he made no move to saddle a horse. They sat looking at each other across the small space, each waiting for the other to break whatever spell had been woven. The fire had burned low, casting dancing shadows on the walls. "This can't happen again," Mary said softly. "You know that, don't you? After tonight, we go back to being strangers. Is that what you want?" "What I want doesn't matter." But her eyes said differently, spoke of wants that nice girls didn't acknowledge, dreams that proper young ladies didn't dare voice. Eli stood slowly, crossed to where she sat, and knelt beside her chair. He didn't touch her, that would be crossing a line they couldn't come back from, but he was close enough to see the tears she was fighting, close enough to feel the warmth radiating from her skin. "What you want always matters," he said fiercely. "Don't let them tell you otherwise. Not your father, not Hartley, not the whole damn town." She reached out then, one trembling hand coming to rest against his cheek. The touch was light as butterfly wings, but it burned through him like wildfire. "In another life," she whispered, "I would have chosen you." The words hung between them, a confession and a goodbye all at once. Then she was standing, moving away, rebuilding the walls of propriety with every step. "The storm's past," she said, her voice steady again. "I should go home." Eli stood too, feeling the loss of her warmth like a physical ache. "I'll saddle Lucifer." "No." She turned at the door, and for a moment, he saw everything she couldn't say written in her eyes. "I came here on my own. I'll leave the same way. It's better if you're not involved." "Mary!" But she was already opening the door, stepping out into the night that smelled of rain and sage and endings. She looked back once, just once, and smiled a sad, sweet smile that would haunt him for days to come. "Thank you," she said simply, "for letting me choose." Then she was gone, swallowed by the darkness, leaving only the echo of her presence and the scent of rain in her wake. Eli stood in his doorway, watching until even the shadow of her had vanished, feeling something fundamental shift inside him. He'd caught her looking, caught her in a moment of desperate wanting that matched his own. And in that catching, he'd made a choice too, though what he'd chosen, and what price he'd pay for it, only time would tell. The cabin felt impossibly empty when he finally closed the door. The chairs by the fire seemed to hold the ghost of their conversation, the very air still stirred by her passing. Eli sat back down, staring at the cup she'd drunk from, and wondered if a man could die from wanting what he couldn't have. Outside, the night stretched on toward dawn, indifferent to human pain and human choices. But inside Eli Carter's cabin, something had changed forever. A door had been opened that couldn't quite be closed, a possibility glimpsed that couldn't quite be forgotten. And somewhere in the darkness, a young woman walked home through the mud and the memory of rain, carrying with her the warmth of a fire she'd never sit beside again, or so she told herself, even as her heart whispered different truths entirely. 3 days passed before Eli saw her again. 3 days of ordinary ranch work that felt anything but ordinary. Every moment weighted with the memory of firelight on honey-colored hair and words that couldn't be taken back. He threw himself into labor with a fury that had the ranch hands exchanging worried glances, mending fences that didn't need mending, breaking horses that were already gentled, anything to exhaust himself enough that he might sleep without dreaming. It was Thursday evening when fate intervened. Eli had ridden into town for supplies, telling himself it had nothing to do with the possibility of glimpsing her. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of blood and gold, when he saw her coming out of the church. She wasn't alone. Theodore Hartley walked beside her, his hand possessive on her elbow. The banker's son was everything Eli despised: soft where ranch work made men hard, cruel where strength should breed kindness. His pale eyes and thin mouth gave him the look of a ferret, always calculating, always grasping. Mary's face was carefully composed, but Eli had learned to read her in those stolen hours by the fire. He saw the tension in her shoulders, the way she held herself slightly apart even as Theodore pulled her closer. She was playing a role, and playing it well, but the cost was written in every rigid line of her body. Their eyes met across the dusty street. For a heartbeat, the mask slipped, and he saw everything: regret, longing, a desperate plea for something she couldn't name. Then Theodore said something, and she turned away, allowing herself to be led toward a waiting carriage. Eli's hands clenched on the reins. Lucifer, sensing his mood, stamped and snorted. Every instinct screamed at him to intervene, to tear her away from that pale-eyed vulture and damn the consequences. But this wasn't a problem that could be solved with fists or guns. This was the slow stranglehold of debt and duty, and all his strength was useless against it. He was still standing there, watching the carriage disappear into the dusk, when a hand fell on his shoulder. "She's a pretty little thing," Jake Morrison observed, having appeared with his usual silent skill. "Shame about the engagement." "What engagement?" The words came out sharper than intended. Jake's weathered face creased in sympathy. "Announced this morning. Theodore Hartley and Mary Whitfield, to be married come spring. Course, everyone knows it's to clear John Whitfield's debts, but folks are pretending otherwise. Easier that way. Spring. 6 months away. 6 months of watching her fade like a flower in drought. All her fire and choice gradually smothered under the weight of what had to be done. Ain't right. Jake continued, spitting tobacco juice into the dust. Girl like that, full of life, hitched to that bloodless weasel. But then, lots of things ain't right in this world. Eli said nothing, but something must have shown in his face because Jake's eyes narrowed. Don't go getting ideas, boss. Your PA would have 10 kinds of fits if you started sniffing around John Whitfield's daughter. And Hartley, well, that's a family that don't forgive debts or slights. I'm not getting ideas. Eli lied. Good, because the last thing that girl needs is more trouble. She's doing what she has to do. Respect that. Jake ambled off, leaving Eli alone with his churning thoughts. Respect. Such a simple word for such a complicated thing. How did you respect someone's sacrifice while watching it destroy them? How did you honor their choice when every fiber of your being screamed that it was wrong? He was still wrestling with these questions when he arrived back at the ranch to find his cabin door ajar. Eli dismounted slowly, hand moving instinctively to the Colt at his hip. The cabin stood isolated in the deepening twilight, no other horses or signs of disturbance visible. But that door, he never left it unlocked, certainly never open. Moving with the careful silence learned from years of frontier living, he approached from the side, keeping to the shadows. Through the window, he could see firelight dancing on the walls. Someone had made themselves at home. He pushed through the door fast, gun drawn and ready, then stopped dead. Mary sat in the same chair she'd occupied 3 nights ago, hands folded in her lap, chin raised despite the fear he could see trembling beneath her composure. She'd changed clothes since he'd seen her in town, trading her good dress for the simple homespun she'd worn that night in the storm. You need to leave, Eli said, not lowering the gun, though he pointed it away from her. Now. I can't. Her voice was steady, but her knuckles were white where she gripped them together. Please, Eli, just let me explain. Explain how you're engaged to Theodore Hartley, how you broke into my home, how you're risking both our necks by being here. He holstered the Colt with sharp, angry movements. There's nothing to explain. I didn't break in. The door was open. Liar. A ghost of a smile touched her lips. All right, it was locked, but the window wasn't. I'm smaller than I look. This isn't funny. Mary, if anyone saw you. No one saw me. I was careful. She stood, moving toward him with that grace that seemed part dancer, part wild creature. I had to come. I had to tell you that the other night. It mattered. Before everything that's going to happen. I needed you to know that. Don't. The word came out raw. Don't make this harder than it has to be. It's already impossible. She was close now, close enough that he could see the unshed tears making her eyes brilliant in the firelight. But I'm going to marry Theodore Hartley, and I'm going to be a good wife, and I'm going to pay my father's debts with my life. So before I do that, before I become someone else's property, I want to... She trailed off, but her eyes finished the sentence. The one in them was naked, desperate. Nothing like the proper young lady she pretended to be in town. What you want doesn't matter. Remember, Eli said, throwing her own words back at her. You made your choice. I made my father's choice. My duty's choice. Her hand came up, hovering just shy of touching his chest. But right now, in this moment, I want to make my own choice, even if it's selfish, even if it's wrong, even if it damns us both. The air between them crackled with tension thick as smoke. Eli could feel the heat of her, could see the pulse racing at her throat. Everything in him wanted to reach for her, to pull her close and taste the rebellion on her lips. But he'd learned long ago that wanting something didn't make it right. And tomorrow, he asked harshly, when the sun comes up and you go back to playing the dutiful daughter, what then? Then I'll have had tonight. Her hand finally made contact, palm flat against his chest, and he felt the touch burn through his shirt like a brand. I'll have had one thing that was mine, one choice that was real. Isn't that worth something? It's worth everything, he admitted, catching her hand in his, meaning to push it away. Instead, he found himself holding it, feeling the calluses from farm work, the strength beneath the softness. Which is why I can't let you throw it away on a moment's madness. Is that what this is, madness? What else would you call it? She stepped closer, close enough that he could feel her breath on his face. I'd call it the only sane thing in an insane world. I'd call it choosing to live before I agree to slowly die. Mary. Her name was a warning, a plea, a prayer all rolled into one. I know what I'm risking, she whispered. My reputation, my future, maybe even my life if Theodore finds out. But I've counted the cost, and I'm willing to pay it. The question is, are you? It was the challenge in her voice that undid him, the echo of his own words about choice and mattering. She was fighting for something here, something precious and fragile and irreplaceable. Who was he to deny her that fight? His free hand came up to cup her face, thumb brushing across her cheekbone with a gentleness that surprised them both. You terrify me, he admitted. This thing between us, it's like wildfire. It'll burn everything in its path. Then let it burn. Her eyes fluttered closed as she leaned into his touch. I'm so tired of being cold. Eli, so tired of being careful and proper and good. Just for tonight, let me burn. He should have been stronger, should have sent her away, barred the door, protected them both from the disaster waiting in the wings. But looking at her there in his cabin, fierce and fragile and absolutely magnificent in her defiance, Eli found his strength had limits after all. This changes nothing, he warned, even as he drew her closer. Come morning, you'll still be engaged. I'll still be Samuel Carter's disappointment of a son. The world will still be what it is. I know. Her hands came up to frame his face, holding him steady. But right now, the world is just this cabin, just you and me, just this choice we're making together. Isn't that enough? No, it wasn't enough. It would never be enough. But it was what they had. And sometimes a man had to make do with the possible when the ideal was out of reach. Eli lowered his head, stopping just short of her lips. Last chance to run, he murmured. Last chance to be the good girl everyone thinks you are. Her answer was to close the distance between them, pressing her mouth to his with a fierce sweetness that tasted of desperation and dreams. For a moment, the world did shrink to just this, the warmth of her in his arms, the soft sound she made as he deepened the kiss, the feeling of something wild and precious breaking free of its cage. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Mary's eyes were bright with triumph and terror in equal measure. I chose, she said simply. Whatever happens now, I chose. Eli held her close, feeling the tremors running through her slight frame, knowing they stood on the edge of something that couldn't be undone. Outside, night had fully fallen, wrapping the cabin in darkness like a secret. Inside, the fire crackled and whispered, casting dancing shadows on the walls. Stay, he heard himself say, though every rational part of him screamed against it. Not like that. Just stay. Let me hold you. Let us have this much at least. She nodded against his chest, and he felt her tears soak through his shirt. They stood there for a long time, holding each other in the firelight. Two people who'd found each other at the wrong time in the wrong place but couldn't quite let go. Later, they sat together on the floor before the fire, her head on his shoulder, his arm around her waist. They talked in whispers, as if speaking too loudly might break whatever spell held the world at bay. She told him about her dreams of seeing the ocean, of reading every book ever written, of being more than just a farmer's daughter or a banker's wife. He told her about the loneliness that ate at him, the weight of expectations he never asked for, the way she made him want to be better than he was.
In another life,
she said as the fire burned low,
we could have been happy.
We could be happy in this one, Eli said, knowing even as he spoke that it was a fool's hope. She turned to look at him, eyes sad and wise beyond her years. No, we couldn't, but we can have tonight. We can have this moment. And maybe, when I'm old and gray and trapped in a life I never wanted, I'll remember this. I'll remember that once. Just once. I was brave enough to choose. The fire died to embers. The night grew cold. And still they sat there, unwilling to let go, unwilling to face the dawn that would tear them apart. They'd crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed, made a choice that would echo through both their lives. But in that moment, with her warmth against him and the taste of her kiss still lingering, Eli couldn't bring himself to regret it. Some things were worth the price you paid for them. Some choices, even the dangerous ones, were worth making. The clock on the mantel ticked toward midnight, counting down the hours until reality reasserted itself. But for now, in this stolen moment in a cabin at the edge of nowhere, two souls had found each other and chosen to hold on. Consequences be damned. It was enough. It had to be. The news spread through Willow Creek like wildfire in drought season. By the time the sun reached its zenith the next day, there wasn't a soul in town who hadn't heard some version of the story. Mary Whitfield, that proper young lady engaged to Theodore Hartley, had been seen leaving the Carter Ranch at dawn, her dress wrinkled and her hair undone. The truth was simpler and more complicated than the gossip suggested. Mary had indeed left at dawn, but fully dressed and with her dignity intact. They'd done nothing but hold each other through the night, talking in whispers until exhaustion claimed them. She'd slept in his arms before the dying fire, and he'd woken her gently as the first light touched the horizon, knowing she had to leave before the ranch came alive. But truth had never been a match for scandal in a small town. Eli first heard the whispers when he rode into town that afternoon. The blacksmith's wife suddenly found urgent business elsewhere when she saw him coming. Old Murphy avoided his eyes at the general store. Even the saloon, usually welcoming to any man with money to spend, seemed to grow quiet when he pushed through the doors. It was Jake who finally told him straight, pulling him aside near the livery stable. "There's talk," the foreman said without preamble. "Ugly talk, about you and the Whitfield girl." Eli's jaw tightened.
What kind of talk?
"The kind that ruins reputations and starts feuds." Jake spat into the dust, his weathered face grim. "Someone saw her leaving your cabin this morning. Don't matter what really happened. Folks have already made up their minds about it." The weight of what they'd done, what he'd allowed to happen, crashed over Eli like a rock slide. He'd known the risk, but somehow, in the firelight with her in his arms, it had seemed worth it. Now, in the harsh light of day, he saw the price she would pay for their moment of choosing. "Where is she?" he asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. "The Hartley place. Theodore came for her this morning, took her and her father both, paying a social call, he said, but everyone knows better." Jake's expression was sympathetic but firm. "Leave it be. Eli, you've done enough damage." But Eli was already moving, striding toward Lucifer with purpose. He couldn't leave it be, not when Mary was facing the consequences of their shared choice alone. The Hartley house squatted on the edge of town like a toad made of brick and pretension. Josiah Hartley had built it to impress, with columns that had no business in Wyoming territory and windows imported from back east. It was a monument to greed dressed up as success, and Eli hated every inch of it. He tied Lucifer to the front gate and strode up the walk, ignoring the shocked stares of neighbors peering through curtains. Let them look. Let them add this to their gossip. He was past caring about appearances. The door was answered by a servant, a thin woman with eyes like a funeral. "Mr. Hartley is not receiving. He'll receive me." Eli pushed past her, his boots ringing on the polished floor. "Where are they?" "Sir, you cannot simply—" But Eli was already following the sound of voices to a parlor that reeked of cigar smoke and cruelty. He found them arranged like a tableau, Josiah Hartley behind his massive desk, Theodore lounging in a chair with the satisfied air of a cat with a mouse, John Whitfield slumped in defeat, and Mary. Mary stood by the window, her back rigid, her face turned away. Even from across the room, Eli could see the tremor in her hands. "Mr. Carter." Josiah Hartley's voice was smooth as oil and twice as slippery. "How unexpected. I don't recall inviting you to my home." "I don't recall needing an invitation." Eli kept his eyes on Mary, willing her to turn, to give him some sign of what she wanted him to do. Theodore rose from his chair, his pale eyes glittering with malice. "You've got some brass showing up here, after what you did to my fiancée." "And what exactly did I do?" Eli's voice was dangerous quiet. "You know damn well what you did." Theodore stepped closer, though he was careful to stay out of arm's reach. "Luring an innocent girl to your cabin, keeping her there all night, ruining her reputation and her virtue." "Theodore?" Mary's voice cut through his words like a blade. She turned from the window, and Eli's heart clenched at the sight of her face, pale but composed, with dark circles under her eyes that spoke of a sleepless night. "That's enough. You're defending him." Theodore's voice rose to near squeak. "After he compromised you." "He did nothing improper." Mary lifted her chin, every inch the proper lady despite the storm raging around her. "We talked, nothing more." "Talked?" Josiah Hartley's laugh was ugly. "Is that what young people call it these days? No matter. The damage is done. The whole town knows you spent the night in his cabin. Your reputation is in tatters. Girl." "Then perhaps," Eli said carefully, "Miss Whitfield should reconsider her engagement. A man who truly cared for her wouldn't speak of her this way." Theodore's face flushed purple. "How dare you?" "I dare because it's true." Eli stepped forward, putting himself between Mary and the Hartley men. "You don't love her. You see her as property, a pretty thing to own and display. She deserves better." "What she deserves," Josiah said coldly, "is irrelevant. What matters is her father's debts and how they'll be paid. Though, given recent events, I'm inclined to reconsider the terms of our arrangement." John Whitfield, who had been silent until now, made a sound like a wounded animal. "Please, Mr. Hartley. Mary's a good girl. She made a mistake, but—" "A mistake?" Josiah's eyes glittered like a snake's. "Your daughter's mistake has embarrassed my son, made our family the subject of common gossip. That carries a price." "Name it." The words left Eli's mouth before he could think better of them. Every eye in the room turned to him. Mary's widened in alarm. Theodore's narrowed in suspicion. And Josiah's took on the calculating gleam of a man who'd just been dealt a winning hand. "Interesting," the banker murmured. "Are you offering to pay the Whitfield debts, Mr. Carter?" "If that's what it takes to free Miss Whitfield from this farce of an engagement, yes." "Eli, no!" Mary stepped forward, her hand reaching out as if to stop him. "You don't understand. The amount—" "Is considerable," Josiah finished. $8,000, to be precise. Plus interest. Of course. Does your father know you're throwing around his money so carelessly? 8,000. It was a fortune, more than most men saw in a lifetime. But Eli had his mother's inheritance, money his father didn't control, sitting in a Denver bank. "I'll have it transferred by week's end," he said, watching Theodore's face twist with rage.
This is ridiculous,
the younger Hartley sputtered.
You can't just buy her like cattle.
"Isn't that what you were doing?" Eli turned on him, letting his contempt show. "At least I'm offering her a choice in the matter."
Enough.
Josiah's voice cracked like a whip. "Mr. Carter, your offer is, intriguing. But money alone won't repair the damage to my family's reputation. If you're truly willing to pay such a sum, I assume you have intentions toward Miss Whitfield." The trap was neatly laid, and Eli saw it clearly. If he said yes, he was admitting to compromising her. If he said no, he was confirming her ruin. Either way, Josiah won. But it was Mary who spoke first, her voice clear and steady. "Mr. Carter's intentions are honorable, as they've always been. If there's fault in this situation, it's mine alone. I went to his cabin of my own free will, seeking advice about my circumstances. He showed me nothing but kindness and respect." Respect," Theodore laughed harshly.
Is that what you call keeping a woman in your cabin all night?
"Yes," Mary said simply. "That's exactly what I call it, because unlike some men, Mr. Carter understands that a woman is more than her reputation or her father's debts. He sees me as a person, not property." The words hung in the air like a challenge. Eli felt a fierce pride in her courage, even as he recognized the cost of it. She was burning bridges with every word, closing doors that could never be reopened. "Well," Josiah said after a long moment,
"This is all very touching, but sentiment doesn't pay bills. Mr. Carter, if you're serious about your offer,
I'll need more than words. I'll need a guarantee." "What kind of guarantee?" The banker's smile was sharp as a blade. "Marriage. You pay the debts and marry the girl, restoring her reputation and saving my son from embarrassment. Or the original arrangement stands, and Theodore takes his slightly tarnished bride as planned. Those are your options." The room seemed to shrink, the walls pressing in. Eli could feel Mary's tension, could see her father's desperate hope, could taste Theodore's bitter fury. But strongest of all was his own sudden, fierce certainty. "I need to speak with Miss Whitfield," he said, "privately." "I don't think," Theodore began, but his father silenced him with a gesture. "5 minutes," Josiah said. "In the garden, Mrs. Morrison will chaperone from the terrace." It was more than Eli had expected. He offered Mary his arm, felt her fingers tremble as she took it. Together they walked out into the afternoon sun, away from the smoke and schemes of the parlor. The garden was pretentious as the house, with roses that struggled in the Wyoming soil and a fountain that looked more like a bird bath. But it was private enough, and that was all that mattered.
"You shouldn't have come,"
Mary said as soon as they were out of earshot.
"You've made everything worse."
"Have I?" Eli caught her hands, holding them gently. "Tell me you want to marry Theodore Hartley. Tell me you choose that life, and I'll walk away right now. What I want doesn't—" "Stop saying that." His voice was fierce. "What you want is the only thing that matters. Not your father's debts, not Hartley's pride, not this town's gossip. What do you want?" "Mary." She looked up at him, and he saw tears tracking down her cheeks.
"I want impossible things. I want to run away, to see the ocean, to be free. I want to wake up in your arms every morning without shame or fear. I want a life that doesn't exist for women like me."
"Then let me give it to you." The words came from somewhere deep, somewhere true. "Marry me, not for the debts or the scandal, but because you choose it, because I choose you, because together we might build something better than what this world offers." "Eli," his name was a broken thing on her lips, "you don't know what you're offering. Marriage is forever. You'd be tied to me, to my family's shame, to all the whispers that will follow us. I've been tied to worse things." He cupped her face gently,
thumbs brushing away her tears. My father's expectations, my brother's ghost, my own loneliness. You're not a burden. Mary, you're a door to a different life, one I didn't know I wanted until you stood on my threshold in the storm. She searched his face, looking for something doubt, perhaps, or regret. And if you come to hate me for it, if you wake up one day and realize you bought yourself a wife you didn't really want, then I'll still be grateful, he said simply. Because even if it ends in disaster, at least it will have been my disaster, my choice, our choice. She was quiet for a long moment, and he could see the war in her eyes, hope battling fear, want fighting wisdom. Then, slowly, she nodded. Yes, she whispered. Yes, I'll marry you. Not for the money or the scandal, but because when I'm with you, I remember who I wanted to be before the world told me who I had to be. Relief and terror flooded through him in equal measure. He'd just changed the course of both their lives with a few words in a banker's parlor. But looking at Mary, seeing the first real smile he'd witnessed from her, Eli couldn't regret it. We should go back, she said, but made no move to do so. They'll want their answer. Let them wait. He pulled her closer. Not quite an embrace, but more than propriety allowed. This moment is ours. She laughed, a sound like water in the desert. You know Theodore will never forgive this. Neither will his father. You're making powerful enemies. I've faced worse than bankers and their soft sons. Have you? She grew serious again. Have you really thought about what this means? A wife you barely know, a scandal that will follow us. Your father's fury. My father can go to hell. The words came out harder than intended. I've lived my whole life by his rules, for his dreams. This is mine. Mrs. Morrison cleared her throat from the terrace, reminding them that time was short. Mary stepped back, smoothing her skirts, rebuilding her composure. But before they returned to the house, she caught his hand. I'll try to be a good wife, she said quietly. I don't know much about ranching or running a household like yours, but I'll learn. I'll try to make you proud. Just be yourself, Eli said. That's all I want. The girl who climbed through my window, who chose courage over comfort. Be her, and we'll figure out the rest together. They walked back into the parlor hand in hand, facing the assembled men with united front, Josiah's knowing smile, Theodore's barely controlled rage, John Whitfield's desperate hope. None of it mattered now. Well, the banker asked, though his expression said he already knew the answer. Miss Whitfield has done me the honor of accepting my proposal. Eli said formally. We'll be married as soon as arrangements can be made. I'll have the funds transferred to cover all outstanding debts, and I trust that will be the end of any unpleasantness regarding last night's events. Theodore shot to his feet. This is absurd. You can't just... It's done, Mary said quietly, but with steel beneath the softness. I've made my choice. Theodore, I'm sorry if it causes you embarrassment, but I won't apologize for choosing my own path. Your own path. Theodore's laugh was ugly. You mean spreading your legs for the highest bidder? The words had barely left his mouth when Eli's fist connected with his jaw. Theodore went down hard, blood streaming from his nose, while his father watched with calculating eyes. Anyone else who speaks of my fiancée with such disrespect will receive the same, Eli said, flexing his bruised knuckles. Are we clear? Josiah helped his son to his feet, his expression unreadable. Crystal clear. Mr. Carter, I'll expect the funds by Friday. Good day to you all. They left the Hartley house together, Eli, Mary, and her father, who seemed stunned by the rapid turn of events. On the street, in full view of the watching town, Eli helped Mary into his wagon with all the courtesy due to a lady. Let them gossip about that, he thought. Let them see that she was valued, chosen, protected. As they drove away, Mary's hand found his. hidden in the folds of her skirt. It was a small touch, barely there, but it felt like a promise. They'd set something in motion that couldn't be stopped, for better or worse. The road ahead was uncertain, full of challenges they couldn't yet imagine, but for the first time in years, Eli felt something other than duty and emptiness. He felt alive, awake, aware of possibilities beyond the boundaries of his father's ranch. Beside him, Mary sat straight and proud, facing the whispers and stares with quiet dignity. She'd chosen too, and that choice would echo through both their lives in ways they couldn't yet fathom. But that was tomorrow's worry. Today, they'd stood up to the world and declared themselves. Today, they'd chosen each other over safety, over propriety, over the easy path. It was enough. It was everything. It was a beginning. The morning after their wedding dawned clear and cold, frost painting the grasslands silver under a pale November sun. Mary stood on the porch of Eli's cabin, their cabin now wrapped in a shawl and watching the ranch come alive. Cowboys emerged from the bunkhouse like bears from hibernation, breath steaming in the frigid air. Horses stamped and whickered in the corrals. Somewhere a rooster crowed, though the sun was already well up. Coffee. Eli appeared beside her, offering a steaming cup. He looked different in the morning light, younger somehow, despite the lines that ranch life had carved into his face. The wedding yesterday had been small, just family and a few ranch hands. But something had shifted between them during those simple vows. "Thank you." She accepted the cup, their fingers brushing. Such a small touch. But it sent warmth through her that had nothing to do with the coffee. "I didn't expect it to be so beautiful here. Wait until you see the sunrise from Eagle Ridge." He pointed toward the mountains, or the way the prairie looks after a lightning storm, all washed clean and green. "Will you teach me?" The question came out more earnest than she'd intended. "About the ranch. About this life. I want to be useful, not just—" She gestured vaguely at herself. "Ornamental." Eli's laugh was rich and genuine. "Mary Carter, you've never been ornamental a day in your life." He grew serious. "But yes, I'll teach you, starting today, if you're willing." She was more than willing. After a quick breakfast, Eli led her to the stables, where Jake Morrison was supervising the morning feeding. "Ma'am." Jake touched his hat brim, his weathered face carefully neutral. Mary knew the ranch hands were still forming opinions about the boss's sudden marriage to the scandal-touched Whitfield girl. Mr. Morrison." She kept her voice steady, chin high. "I hope you'll be patient with me. I have much to learn." Something in Jake's expression softened. "We all started somewhere, ma'am. Even Eli here once tried to milk a bull." "I was 7, Eli protested. But he was smiling, and no one told me the difference. "That's what you get for sneaking off instead of doing your chores proper." Jake winked at Mary. "I'll find you a gentle mare, ma'am. Nothing too spirited for your first ride." But when he let out a placid-looking bay mare, Mary shook her head. "No, I want to learn properly, not be coddled." She looked around the stable, her eyes landing on a spirited paint horse tossing its head in a nearby stall. "What about that one?" "That's Dancer," Jake said dubiously. "She's got opinions. That one might be a bit much for a town girl." Mary moved toward the stall, extending her hand slowly. The mare snorted, ears flicking back and forth, then stretched her neck to lip at Mary's palm. "She's testing me." "Everything out here will test you," Eli said quietly, watching her with those storm-gray eyes. "The land, the weather, the animals, even the people." "Good." Mary turned back to Dancer, stroking the white blaze on her face. "I'm tired of things being easy. Easy is just another word for empty." They spent the morning in the corral, Eli teaching her how to saddle and bridle, how to mount and dismount, how to hold the reins and shift her weight.
Dancer lived up to her name, prancing and sidestepping. But Mary persisted with a determination that had Jake nodding approval. "You're trying too hard," Eli said after her third near fall. "Relax. Feel the horse's rhythm and match it, like a dance."
"I was never much good at dancing either,"
Mary muttered, but she tried to loosen her rigid posture. "Here." Eli swung up behind her, his arms coming around to guide her hands on the reins. "Feel that the way she moves. Don't fight it. Move with it." Mary forgot to breathe, surrounded by his warmth, his solid presence at her back. She could barely focus on the horse beneath them. This was her husband, she reminded herself. She had the right to his closeness now, but that knowledge only made her more aware of every point of contact between them. "Better," Eli murmured, his breath warm against her ear.
"See, you're a natural."
By afternoon, she was riding solo around the corral, Dancer responding to the lightest touch of heel or rein. Her dress was dusty, her carefully pinned hair coming loose, and she'd never felt more alive. "Tomorrow we'll try the open range," Eli promised as they rubbed down the horses. "There's a whole world out there waiting for you." But the world, it seemed, was also waiting for them in less pleasant ways. Samuel Carter arrived as they were finishing lunch, his big frame filling the cabin doorway like a thundercloud. He'd been conspicuously absent from the wedding, claiming urgent business in Denver. "Father." Eli rose but didn't move to greet him. "You're back early." "Early enough to hear about your foolishness from strangers." Samuel's cold blue eyes fixed on Mary. "So this is the girl worth $8,000 and a scandal that'll follow us for years." "This is my wife," Eli said, steel in his voice. "Mary, my father. Samuel Carter, father. Mary Carter." "Ma'am." Samuel's nod was barely civil. "I suppose you think you've done well for yourself, catching my son in your net." Mary stood slowly, her prairie sky eyes meeting his without flinching. "I think your son is a man who makes his own choices. Mr. Carter, if anyone was caught, it was me caught by kindness when I expected cruelty, by respect when I'd known only dismissal." Pretty words. Samuel moved into the cabin, his presence seeming to shrink the space. "But words don't run a ranch. Words don't build a legacy. My son had obligations." "Your son has a life," Eli interrupted. "One that doesn't revolve around your ambitions." "My ambitions built this ranch. My ambitions kept us alive through drought and Indians and market crashes." Samuel's voice rose. "And you throw it all away for a pretty face and a moment's passion. If you came here to insult my wife, you can leave." Eli stepped forward, putting himself between Mary and his father. "We've made our choice. Accept it or don't, but don't come into our home speaking poison." Father and son faced each other, two stubborn wills colliding like mountain rams. Mary could feel the years of conflict between them, layers of disappointment and expectation hardened into something sharp and brittle. "Our home," Samuel laughed harshly. "Boy, you don't own anything that I didn't give you. This cabin, this land, the very clothes on your back all mine." "The cabin I built with my own hands, the land I've worked since I could walk, the clothes bought with wages you paid me same as any hand." Eli's voice was deadly quiet now. "And the $8,000 that paid Mary's father's debts, that was Mother's money. Her legacy to me, held in trust these 10 years. Not yours, never yours." Something flickered in Samuel's eyes, surprise, perhaps, or a grudging respect. "Martha always was too soft on you." Mother understood that love matters more than land. Mary surprised herself by speaking. She'd have understood what Eli and I have chosen. "Would she?" Samuel turned that cold gaze on her. "My Martha was a lady, educated, refined, from good family back east. Not a farmer's daughter who spent the night in a man's cabin before marriage." The words were meant to wound, and they did. But Mary had learned something about herself in the past days. She was stronger than she'd known, braver than she'd believed. "You're right," she said calmly. I'm not educated or refined. I'm not from good family, but I know how to work, how to endure, how to build something from nothing. And I know how to love your son for who he is, not who you want him to be. Love. Samuel spat the word like a curse. Love doesn't last through a hard winter. Love doesn't bring in the harvest or fight off raiders. No, Mary agreed. But neither does loneliness. Neither does a heart gone cold from too much ambition and too little joy. The cabin fell silent except for the pop of wood in the fireplace. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows. Mary felt Eli's hand find hers, a silent support that gave her courage. You want to play at being a rancher's wife? Samuel's voice had gone soft, dangerous. Fine. We'll see how long you last when winter comes howling down from the mountains. We'll see how pretty your words are when the cattle are dying and the money's running thin. He looked at his son. The south pasture fence is down again. Since you're so set on making your own choices, you can fix it yourself. No help from the hands. Let's see what your love is worth when tested. With that, he strode out, leaving a wake of tension like smoke after a fire. Eli, Mary began, but he shook his head. He's not wrong about the fence, and he's not entirely wrong about winter. He met her eyes, searching. This life, it's hard. Mary, harder than you know. If you want to change your mind. She silenced him with a kiss, fierce and sure. I climbed through your window in a storm. I stood up to Theodore Hartley. I just faced down your father. Do you really think a little weather will send me running? His arms came around her, holding tight. You're something else. Mary Carter. I'm trying to be... She pulled back to look at him. Now, show me this fence. If we're going to fix it ourselves, we'd better get started. They spent the rest of the day working side by side in the south pasture. The fence was worse than Samuel had implied, a quarter-mile of posts down. Wire tangled and broken. Mary learned to dig post holes, stretch wire, hammer stakes. Her hands blistered and bled. Her back ached. Sweat soaked through her dress despite the cool air. You don't have to do this, Eli said for the 10th time, watching her struggle with a particularly stubborn post. Yes, I do. She wiped her forehead with a dirty hand, leaving a streak of mud. Your father's watching, from the rise over there. He's been there an hour. Eli glanced toward the distant figure on horseback. Testing us. Then let's pass the test. She grabbed the post digger again, blisters screaming. Together. The sun was setting by the time they finished, painting the sky in shades of fire. The fence stood straight and true, ugly in its newness but solid. Mary could barely stand, every muscle screaming, but satisfaction warmed her better than any fire. Look at that, she said, leaning against Eli as they surveyed their work. We did that. You did that, he corrected, pressing a kiss to her temple. I just helped. They were filthy, exhausted, probably looking like the rawest greenhorns. But when Samuel rode down from his watching post, something in his expression had changed. It'll hold, was all he said. But coming from him, it was high praise. He looked at Mary, really looked at her for the first time. You've got grit, girl. Maybe you'll do after all. He rode off without another word, but Mary felt like she'd won a major victory. That night, as they sat by their fire nursing blistered hands and aching muscles, Eli taught her about the stars, how to find north, how to read the weather in their patterns, how his mother had taught him the constellations on nights like this. She'd have liked you, he said softly. You're like her in some ways, stronger than you look, braver than seems sensible. Tell me about her, Mary said, settling against his shoulder. So he did, painting pictures with words of Martha Carter, a Boston lady who'd followed her husband west and made a life in the wilderness, who'd planted roses in defiance of the prairie wind and taught her sons to see beauty even in harsh places. She used to say that the land would test us, but it would also teach us that everything worth having came with a price,
but that made it more precious, not less. He was quiet for a moment. I didn't understand what she meant until now. Mary lifted their joined hands, studying the blisters and cuts that marked her transformation from town girl to rancher's wife. "I'm learning," she said simply, "about the land, about the life, about you." "And what have you learned about me?" She turned to face him fully, firelight dancing in her eyes. "That you're stubborn as your father, but kinder. That you see the world as it could be, not just as it is. That you gave me freedom when everyone else offered cages." She touched his face gently. "That I would choose you again, knowing everything I know now. Every blister, every ache, every hard word from your father, I'd choose it all again." He caught her hand, pressing a kiss to her palm despite the dirt and blisters. "Even when winter comes." "Especially then," she said, "because we'll face it together." Outside, coyotes called to each other across the darkness, wild and free. The wind whispered promises of storms to come, challenges to face, tests to pass. But inside their cabin, two people who'd found each other against all odds held tight and faced the future without fear. They were building something here, not just a marriage or a life, but a new kind of story. One where choice mattered more than convention, where partnership meant more than possession, where love was not a weakness but a strength that could stand against any storm. The fire burned low, the stars wheeled overhead, and in a cabin on the edge of nowhere, Eli and Mary Carter began the real work of becoming who they were meant to be together. Against the world, choosing each other with every sunrise and every sunset, every blister and every triumph. It was hard work. It was good work. It was theirs. The riders came with the dawn, dark shapes against the blood-red horizon. Mary saw them first from the cabin window where she'd been watching the sunrise, her morning coffee growing cold in her hands. 6 men, moving with the purposeful ease of those who belonged to the land or thought they did. "Eli," she called softly, not wanting to wake him too abruptly. These past weeks had been hard, winter settling over the ranch like an iron fist. And he'd been up late tending a sick calf. He was beside her in an instant, fully awake, already reaching for the rifle by the door. "Hartley's men," he said, recognizing the lead rider's gray horse. "Stay inside." "No." Mary set down her coffee and reached for her shawl. "We face this together. Remember." His jaw tightened, but he nodded. They stepped onto the porch as the riders pulled up, breath steaming in the frigid morning air. Mary recognized 2 of them, Luke Brennan and Tom Douglas, men who'd tipped their hats to her in town before the scandal. Now their faces were hard as the frozen ground. "Morning, Carter." The lead rider, a man named Wade Hutchinson, didn't bother with pleasantries. "Mister, Hartley sends his regards." "Does he now?" Eli's voice was calm, but Mary could feel the tension radiating from him. "And what does Josiah want that requires 6 men before breakfast?" "Just checking on our interests." Wade's eyes slid to Mary, cold and assessing, making sure everything's as it should be. "Your interests?" Eli stepped forward slightly, a subtle positioning that put him between Mary and the riders. "Last I checked, I paid Hartley every cent owed. We have no business with him." "Well now, that's where things get complicated." Wade leaned forward in his saddle, leather creaking. "See, there was the matter of promises made, understandings reached. Your woman there, she was spoken for." "My wife," Eli corrected sharply. "Made her choice. The debts are paid. The matter is settled." Theodore doesn't see it that way. Another rider, younger and meaner looking, spoke up. Says he was promised goods that weren't delivered. Says there should be compensation. Mary felt anger rise in her throat like bile. "Goods? Is that what I was, something to be delivered?" Wade's smile was thin as a blade. "Now, ma'am, no need to get riled. We're just having a friendly conversation about obligations." "The only obligation here," Eli said, his hand moving casually toward his sidearm, "is for you to get off my land before I help you along." The tension stretched taut as fence wire. 6 men, all armed, against Eli alone. Mary's heart hammered, but she kept her face calm, her chin high. She'd learned in these past weeks that showing fear in this world was like showing blood to wolves. Now. Wade raised a hand in mock peace. "No need for unpleasantness. We're just delivering a message. Mr. Hartley thinks maybe there was some irregularity in how the debts were paid. Some question about where that money really came from. He's thinking maybe the law should look into it." "He can think what he likes," Eli said. "The money was mine, free and clear. My mother's legacy, held in trust at First National in Denver. Any lawman who wants to check is welcome to it." "Maybe so." Wade's eyes narrowed. "But investigations take time. During that time, well, assets might need to be frozen. Business suspended. And winter's coming on hard this year. Be a shame if you couldn't buy feed, couldn't pay hands." The threat was clear. Hartley couldn't take Mary back, but he could make their lives miserable. Could use his influence to strangle the ranch slowly, all while staying within the law. "Mr. Hutchinson." Mary stepped forward, ignoring Eli's warning touch. "What would it take to end this? What does Theodore really want?" Wade's smile widened. "Smart woman. Theodore's a reasonable man. He understands you made your choice, but choices have consequences. He figures, say, $5,000 would soothe his wounded pride. Help him forget the embarrassment of being thrown over for a Carter." "Extortion," Eli spat. "Plain and simple." "Business," Wade corrected. "Just business. You've got a week to think it over. After that," he shrugged. "Well, winter's hard enough without troubles piling up." The riders wheeled their horses and rode off, leaving silence in their wake. Mary could feel Eli vibrating with rage beside her, could see his knuckles white where he gripped the porch rail. "We won't pay," he said flatly. "Not 1 cent." "No," Mary agreed. "We won't." She turned to face him. "But we need to be smart about this. Hartley has influence we don't. If he turns the town against us, cuts off our credit, then we'll make do." But she could see the worry in his eyes. The ranch operated on thin margins in the best of times. Winter was always a battle against feed costs and weather. Add Hartley's interference, and it could spell disaster. "Jake needs to know," she said, "and your father." Eli's laugh was bitter. "Father will say it's what I deserve for defying him." "Maybe, but he won't let Hartley destroy the Carter name. Pride works both ways." She was right, and they both knew it. Within an hour, Jake Morrison was in their kitchen, face grave as he absorbed the news. Within 2 hours, Samuel Carter himself arrived, looking like thunder. "Fools," he said without preamble. "Both of you. Did you think Hartley would just let this go? The man's vindictive as a snake and twice as patient." "We paid the debts," Eli said stubbornly. "Legal and proper." "Legal's got nothing to do with it." Samuel paced the small cabin like a caged bear. "This is about power, about face. You humiliated his son. Took what was promised to him. In Hartley's mind, that demands answer." "So what do you suggest?" Mary asked. "Pay him blood money. Let him extort us." Samuel studied her with those cold blue eyes. "You've got spine, girl. I'll give you that. But spine doesn't stop bullets or break blockades." He was quiet for a moment, calculating. "How attached are you to this cabin?" "Father," Eli started, but Samuel cut him off. "I'm not suggesting you give up. I'm suggesting you think strategic. Move to the main house for the winter. Pool resources. Present a united front." Mary saw Eli's jaw tighten. The cabin was his sanctuary, his independence. Moving back to his father's house would feel like defeat. "It's not about pride," Boy, Samuel said, reading his son's expression. It's about survival. Hartley wants to isolate you, make you vulnerable. Don't give him the satisfaction. He's right, Jake said quietly. Together, we're harder to pressure. Separate, we're easy targets. Mary touched Eli's arm gently. It's just for winter, she said softly. And think of it this way, your father's offering alliance, not surrender. That's something. The rest of the day passed in a blur of preparation. If they were going to make a stand, they needed to be ready. Jake sent riders to check the herds, move them closer to shelter. Samuel sent messages to old allies, calling in favors. Mary and Eli packed their essential belongings, preparing for a strategic retreat that felt too much like defeat. But as night fell, something else arrived with the darkness. Mary was carrying a box of books to the wagon when she heard the thunder of hooves, the flicker of torches through the trees. Her blood turned to ice. "Eli!" she screamed, dropping the box. He was out of the cabin in seconds, rifle in hand. Jake and several hands materialized from the shadows, weapons ready. But the riders weren't attacking, not yet. They circled the cabin at a distance, torches painting wild shadows, whooping and hollering like demons. "Just trying to scare us," Jake muttered, but his hand was steady on his gun. Then Mary saw what they were dragging behind one horse, an effigy, crude but recognizable. A stuffed figure in a dress, honey-colored yarn for hair, a sign around its neck, Carter's whore. Rage, hot and clean, burned through her fear. These men thought they could terrorize her, reduce her to a scared girl hiding behind her husband's gun. They didn't know who they were dealing with. Before anyone could stop her, Mary strode off the porch toward the riders. She heard Eli curse behind her, heard Boots running to follow, but she didn't stop. "You want me?" she called out, voice carrying clear over the hoofbeats. "Here I am, no need for dolls and games." The riders wheeled, confused by her approach. One raised his torch higher, illuminating her face. "Go home, woman," he called. "This ain't your business." "My name is Mary Carter," she said, loud enough for all to hear. "And everything that threatens this ranch is my business. You want to burn something? Try burning me. But know this, I'm not some town girl playing at ranch life. I chose this life, this man, this land, and I'll defend all three." "Mary, get back." Eli was beside her now, trying to pull her behind him. But something in her words, her stance, her absolute lack of fear, had shifted the mood. The riders milled uncertainly. They'd come to terrorize, to send a message. They hadn't expected to be confronted by their target. "Hartley, send you boys." Jake had moved up too, flanked by 4 armed ranch hands. "Or is this your own idea of fun?" "Just delivering a message," one rider muttered, but the fire had gone out of their harassment. "Message received." Samuel Carter's voice rang out. The old man stood on the porch, a shotgun cradled in his arms. "Now get off my land before I deliver one of my own." For a moment, the tableau held riders with torches facing the united front of the Carter ranch. Then, one by one, the torches were thrown to the ground and stomped out. The riders melted back into the darkness, leaving only the acrid smell of smoke and the trampled effigy behind. "Fools," Samuel said again, but this time Mary heard something different in his voice. "Brave fools. Maybe, but fools all the same." "I won't be run off," Mary said, surprised to find she was trembling now that the danger had passed. "Not by Hartley. Not by anyone." "No," Samuel agreed, studying her with new eyes. "I don't believe you will." They worked through the night, moving to the main house, setting watches, preparing for whatever might come next. It was near dawn when Mary found herself alone with Samuel in his study, Eli having gone to check the guards. "You did a damn fool thing tonight," the old man said, pouring 2 glasses of whiskey. "Walking out to face those riders." Someone had to show them we weren't afraid. Weren't you? He handed her a glass, and she was surprised to see his hand wasn't quite steady. I was watching you walk out there. I thought, this is how I lose another one. This is how the ranch takes one more. Mary sipped the whiskey, feeling it burn. But I'm still here. You are. Samuel was quiet for a long moment. Martha would have done the same thing. You know, walked out there, chin up, daring them to do their worst. I tried to protect her from the hardness of this life, tried to keep her safe. His laugh was bitter. Fever took her anyway. All my protection couldn't stop that. Maybe she didn't need protection, Mary said softly. Maybe she needed partnership. Samuel's eyes sharpened. You think you're teaching me about my own wife? Girl. I think, Mary said carefully, that strong women don't become weak just because someone loves them, and trying to cage them, even with good intentions, only makes them fight harder to be free. The old man was quiet for so long, Mary thought she'd overstepped. Then he raised his glass. To strong women, he said, and the fools who love them. They drank, the whiskey burning away the last of the night's chill. Outside, dawn was breaking over the ranch, painting the sky in shades of hope despite the troubles gathering on the horizon. It's going to get worse, Samuel said. Hartley won't stop with scare tactics. He'll come at us through the law, through the banks, through every connection he has. You ready for that? I'm ready to learn, Mary said. To fight, to stand with Eli against whatever comes. Then you might survive this after all. Samuel stood, suddenly looking every one of his years. Get some rest, girl. Tomorrow we start fighting back. And Mary, that thing you did tonight, facing down those riders, don't do it again. You're a Carter now. We don't make ourselves easy targets. But as Mary climbed the stairs to find Eli, she knew she'd do it again if needed. Because being a Carter meant more than just taking the name. It meant protecting what was yours, standing for what was right, and never, ever backing down from a fight. The war with Hartley was just beginning. But tonight, they'd shown they wouldn't be easy prey. Tonight, they'd stood together, all of them, even Samuel, and faced down the darkness. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight, Mary Carter had found her place, her people, her purpose, and no amount of threats or torches could take that away. In their borrowed room in the main house, Eli was waiting, relief and pride warring in his eyes. You scared 10 years off my life tonight, he said, pulling her close. Only 10, she tried for lightness, but her voice shook. I'll have to try harder next time. No next time. His arms tightened. Promise me. Mary, no more walking toward men with torches. I can't promise that. She pulled back to look at him. I can't promise to hide when our life is threatened. But I can promise to be smart about it. To not take unnecessary risks. Is that enough? He was quiet for a moment, then nodded. It'll have to be. God knows I didn't marry you expecting a quiet life. No, she agreed, settling against his chest. You married me expecting a partner. That's what you've got. Outside their window, the ranch was stirring to life despite the night's disturbances. Cattle lowed in the distance. Horses nickered in the corrals, the ordinary sounds of a life worth fighting for. The battle was coming. Hartley wouldn't give up easily, and winter would test them all. But Mary had learned something tonight. She was exactly where she belonged. Not because a man had chosen her or because circumstances had forced her here, but because she'd chosen it herself, claimed it with her own courage. Let Hartley come. Let winter howl. She was Mary Carter, and she would not be moved. The first real snow came 3 days before Christmas, transforming the ranch into a crystalline wilderness. Mary stood at the kitchen window of the main house, watching fat flakes drift past. When she heard the commotion outside, horses arriving fast, men shouting. They took Eli. Jake Morrison burst through the door, snow swirling around him, face grim as death.
Samuel was on his feet instantly, reaching for his gun belt.
Who took him?
Mary's voice was steady despite the ice forming in her chest.
Where?
Sheriff Daniels and 2 deputies arrested him in town on charges of theft and fraud. Jake's weathered face was tight with anger. Hartley's doing. Claims the money Eli used to pay the debts was stolen from the bank.
That's impossible, Mary said. The money was his mother's legacy.
Don't matter what's true. Samuel cut in, already pulling on his coat. Matters what Hartley can make stick in court, and with Judge Patterson in his pocket. He didn't need to finish. Mary felt the world tilt, but forced herself to think clearly. Panic wouldn't help Eli now. How long ago? Hour, maybe 2. They were taking him to the county jail in Laramie. That's a day's ride in this weather. Then we'd better get moving. Mary was already reaching for her own coat, the heavy wool one Eli had bought her just last week. You're not going anywhere, Samuel said flatly. This is men's business. This is my husband's life, Mary shot back. And I'm done with being told what I can and can't do when it comes to protecting what's mine. The old man's jaw worked, but Jake spoke first. She's got a point, boss. Besides, might be useful having her along. Judge might listen to a wife pleading for her husband. Samuel's eyes narrowed, but he nodded curtly. Fine, but we do this smart. Jake, get the boys ready. We ride in force, but peaceful. Last thing we need is to give them excuse to shoot us as outlaws. Within an hour, they were mounted and moving through the falling snow. Mary rode Dancer, the spirited paint mare now as responsive to her touch as to any seasoned hand. She'd packed light but smart food, medical supplies, and the papers proving Eli's inheritance, though she doubted paper would matter much against Hartley's influence. The ride to Laramie was brutal. Snow turned to sleet, then back to snow. The wind cut through even the heaviest coats like a knife. They stopped only to rest the horses, pushing through conditions that would have sent sensible folks to shelter. You holding up? Jake rode beside her as they navigated a particularly treacherous pass. I'm fine, Mary said through chattering teeth. How bad is Judge Patterson? Bad enough. Hartley owns him like he owns half the territory. But there's talk the federal marshal might be in town. Tom Morrison, no relation to me, is a straight shooter. If we can get him involved. Hope, thin but real, kindled in Mary's chest. Federal law might trump local corruption, if they could just get someone to listen. They reached Laramie as darkness fell, the town glowing with lamplight through the swirling snow. The jail sat squat and ugly on Main Street, iron bars on the windows like dead eyes. I'll go in first, Samuel said. Feel out the situation. Jake, take Mary to the hotel. Get her a room. No. Mary swung down from Dancer, legs nearly buckling from the long, cold ride. We go together or not at all. Samuel looked ready to argue, but something in her face stopped him. Maybe he was learning, finally, that Carter women by birth or marriage didn't back down. The jail was warm after the bitter cold outside, but the warmth did nothing to ease the chill in Mary's heart. Sheriff Daniels sat behind his desk, a thin man with the shifty look of someone who knew he was doing wrong, but liked the pay too much to care. Samuel Carter, he said, not bothering to rise. Figured you'd show up. Your boy's in back. Can't see him till the judge says so. On what charges? Samuel's voice could have frozen hell. Theft, fraud, conspiracy. Daniel shuffled some papers, not meeting anyone's eyes. Seems that money he used came from the cattleman's bank. Josiah Hartley himself identified it as stolen funds.
That's a lie. Mary stepped forward. The money came from First National in Denver. His mother's inheritance.
Daniels finally looked at her, and she saw pity mixed with the guilt. That's for the court to decide. Ma'am, trial's set for day after tomorrow. Let her see him. Samuel said, she's his wife. She has rights. Judge's orders were clear. Please. Mary moved closer to the desk. letting her exhaustion show, playing on whatever conscience the man might have left. Just 5 minutes. What harm could it do? Daniels wavered, and she pressed on. It's almost Christmas. Sheriff, whatever you think he's done, surely a man deserves to see his wife before— She let the sentence hang, the unspoken possibility of execution hovering in the air like a ghost. 5 minutes, Daniels said finally, and I go with you. The cells were in back, cold despite a small stove struggling against the chill. Eli sat on a narrow bunk in the furthest cell, and Mary's heart clenched at the sight of him disheveled, a bruise darkening his jaw, but unbroken. Mary! He was at the bars instantly. What are you doing here, the weather? Did you really think I'd stay home while they caged you? She reached through the bars, gripping his hands. They were cold. Too cold. Are you hurt? I'm fine, but you shouldn't have come. This is what Hartley wants all of us here. Away from the ranch. Vulnerable. The ranch is secure, Samuel said from behind her. Half the hands are there, armed and ready. The other half are here with us. Eli's eyes moved between his wife and his father. You came together. Your wife wouldn't have it any other way, Samuel said dryly. Girl's as stubborn as your mother ever was. 5 minutes are up, Daniels said. But Mary held tight to Eli's hands. We'll get you out, she promised. I don't care what it takes. Mary, his voice was urgent. Be careful. Hartley's not done. This is just the opening move. She was pulled away, but not before pressing the packet of papers into his hands, proof of his innocence. If anyone would bother to look. Outside, the snow had stopped, but the cold had deepened. Mary stood on the jail's front steps, mind racing. The hotel, Samuel began, but stopped as a figure emerged from the shadows across the street. Mrs. Carter. The man was tall, lean, with the kind of stillness that spoke of controlled power. A federal marshal's badge gleamed on his coat. Tom Morrison. I understand your husband's in some trouble. Hope flared again. Marshal Morrison. Yes, he's been falsely accused. Why don't we talk somewhere warmer? The marshal glanced meaningfully at the jail windows. The Cattlemen's Club is still open, and I find conversations there tend to be more private. The Cattleman's Club was warm, wood-paneled, and nearly empty at this hour. Morrison led them to a corner table, signaling for coffee. I've been watching Josiah Hartley for some time, he said without preamble. Man's got his fingers in too many pies, not all of them legal. Problem is, he's careful, covers his tracks. Can you help? Mary asked directly. Morrison studied her. Depends. You willing to take risks, Mrs. Carter? Because going after Hartley isn't just about freeing your husband. It's about taking down a man who owns half this territory's power structure. I'll do whatever it takes. Mary, Samuel warned, but she cut him off. No, they took Eli. They threatened our home, our lives, our future. I'm done playing defense. She met Morrison's steady gaze. What do you need? Evidence, real evidence of Hartley's crimes, the kind that would make even a bought judge think twice. Morrison sipped his coffee thoughtfully. Word is, Hartley keeps records. Real careful, like, man doesn't trust anyone. So he documents everything bribes paid, officials bought, deals made. Where? Jake asked. His office at the bank, most likely. Maybe his home. Morrison set down his cup carefully. Of course, I can't suggest anyone break in and steal those records. That would be illegal. The meaning was clear. Mary felt her heart race. And if someone happened to find such records through completely legal means, of course. Morrison's smile was thin as a blade. Well, then I'd have cause to intervene. Federal cause, which trumps local authority. They talked for another hour, planning carefully. It was near midnight when they finally left, the town dark and quiet under its blanket of snow. Mary had a room at the hotel, but sleep felt impossible. In 2 days, Eli would face trial with a corrupt judge and manufactured evidence. Unless—
"You're thinking of doing something stupid," Samuel said, catching her arm as she headed for her room.
"I'm thinking of doing something necessary," Mary corrected.
The old man studied her for a long moment. "You know, I spent 20 years trying to protect Martha from this life, trying to keep her safe, soft, separate from the ugliness."
His laugh was bitter. "Know what she told me once she said the cage I built to protect her was still a cage?"
"Eli told me she was strong. Strongest woman I ever knew. Until now, maybe." Samuel's eyes were tired but clear. "Whatever you're planning, girl, be smart about it. I've lost enough to this land. Don't make me lose you both."
Mary nodded,
throat tight. "I'll be careful."
But as she lay in her hotel bed,
staring at the ceiling, careful felt like another word for defeated. Eli was in a cell because of her, because he'd chosen her over an easier path. The least she could do was choose him right back, no matter the cost. The next day dawned clear and bitter cold. Mary spent it in reconnaissance, walking past the bank, noting routines and schedules. Theodore Hartley emerged once, and she forced herself to remain calm as he passed, his pale eyes sliding over her like she was furniture. That night, the federal marshal had been clear about one thing: he needed evidence, but he couldn't be involved in obtaining it. The risk would be all theirs.
"I'll go," Jake volunteered as they met in Mary's hotel room.
"I know the town, know how to get in and out quiet-like."
"No,"
Mary said. "I'll go."
"Absolutely not," Samuel and Jake said in unison.
"Listen to me." Mary leaned forward, intense. Who's the last person they'd expect? The desperate wife? Maybe, but not tonight. Tonight I'm supposed to be crying in my hotel room, waiting for my husband's trial. They won't be watching for me. "You don't know the first thing about breaking into buildings," Samuel protested. Mary's smile was sharp. "I climbed through Eli's window in a storm. Remember, besides, I'm smaller, quieter, and if I'm caught—" She shrugged. "A confused woman, lost and upset about her husband, looking for someone to plead with. They might believe that. Jake gets caught. He's shot on sight."
The argument went on, but in the end, practicality won. Near midnight, dressed in dark men's clothes borrowed from the hotel's laundry, Mary slipped out into the frozen night. The bank squatted on Main Street like a fortress of respectability hiding corruption. Mary circled to the back, finding the window Morrison had mentioned small, but not too small for someone her size. Her hands shook as she worked the latch with a thin piece of metal Jake had given her. Not from fear, exactly, but from the enormity of what she was doing. Mary Whitfield would never have dreamed of breaking into a building, but she wasn't Mary Whitfield anymore. The window gave with a soft click. Mary held her breath, waiting, but no alarm sounded. She slipped inside, dropping into what looked like a storage room. The bank was different in darkness, all shadows and silence. Mary moved carefully, following Morrison's directions to Hartley's office. The door was locked, but the same trick that worked on the window worked here. Inside, she used a small lantern, keeping the flame low. The office was all dark wood and leather, reeking of cigars and greed. The safe stood in the corner, massive and impenetrable. But Morrison had said to check the desk first. Men like Hartley often kept their most damning secrets close. The desk drawers were locked too, but yielded to persistence. And there, in a hidden compartment behind a false back, Mary found them ledgers, letters, documents that told a story of corruption spanning years, bribes to judges, sheriffs, territorial officials, illegal land grabs, even murder, sanitized in careful prose, but murder nonetheless. Her hands trembled as she selected the most damning pieces. Too much would be suspicious, but these would be enough. A sound from the street froze her. Footsteps, coming closer. Mary doused the lantern, heart hammering.
The footsteps paused outside the bank, and she heard voices, guards making rounds. Time stretched like taffy as she waited, barely breathing. Finally, the footsteps moved on. Mary forced herself to count to 100 before moving again, carefully replacing everything except the documents she'd taken. The journey back to the hotel felt like miles instead of blocks. Every shadow could hide an enemy. Every sound might herald discovery. But she made it, slipping back through her window just as the eastern sky began to lighten. Jake and Samuel were waiting, faces drawn with worry. "Well?" Samuel demanded. Mary pulled out the documents, hands still shaking. "Evidence. Enough to hang him, if the marshal's as good as his word." Jake whistled low, scanning the papers. "Girl, you just declared war on the most powerful man in the territory." "No," Mary corrected, exhaustion hitting her like a physical weight. "I just chose my husband over my fear. Hartley declared war the day he had Eli arrested." Samuel was reading too, his face growing darker with each page. This is bigger than just us. Hartley's got half the territory in his pocket." "Then maybe it's time someone picked that pocket," Mary said. A knock at the door made them all freeze. Mary's hand went to the small pistol Jake had given her, but Samuel held up a hand, moving to answer. It was Morrison, looking unsurprised to find them all awake and fully dressed. "Productive night?" he asked mildly. Mary handed him the documents without a word. The marshal read quickly, efficiently, his face giving nothing away. Finally, he looked up. "This'll do," he said simply. "In fact, this'll more than do. Judge Patterson's on here, Sheriff Daniels, half the territorial government." He smiled, and it wasn't a pleasant expression. "Miss Carter, you may have just cleaned up Wyoming territory." "I just want my husband free," Mary said. "Oh, he'll be free by noon. And Mr. Hartley, he'll be taking Eli's cell if there's any justice left in this world." Morrison tucked the documents inside his coat. "I'll need you to stay here, all of you. Act surprised when the federal marshals arrive at the jail. Can you do that?" "We'll manage," Samuel said dryly. Morrison left, and exhaustion finally claimed Mary. She slept fitfully, dreaming of dark offices and Eli's face behind bars. She woke to commotion in the street. Jake was at the window, grinning broadly. "Federal boys just arrested Hartley, Theodore, Sheriff Daniels, and Judge Patterson. Half the town's out watching." Mary was up and dressing in seconds, not caring about propriety. She had to see Eli, had to know he was safe. The jail was chaos. Federal marshals everywhere, town officials being let out in chains, and there, walking free, was Eli. His eyes found hers across the crowd, and then she was running, propriety be damned, into his arms. "Mary," he breathed into her hair. "What did you do?" "I chose you," she said simply. "The way you chose me. Forever. Remember?" He pulled back to look at her, and she saw everything in his eyes: love, pride, fear, wonder. "You impossible woman. You could have been killed." "But I wasn't, and you're free. That's all that matters." Samuel approached, looking older but somehow lighter. "We should go. Ranch won't run itself. And I imagine we'll have some sorting out to do with Hartley's affairs." They rode home through a world transformed by snow and justice. The ranch, when it came into view, looked like something from a fairy tale, white and pristine under winter's blanket. "It's beautiful," Mary breathed. "It's home," Eli corrected, arm tight around her waist. "Our home." As they dismounted, Samuel cleared his throat. "That fool thing you did, girl, breaking into Hartley's office." Mary tensed, but the old man continued. "Martha would have done the same, would have been proud to call you daughter." It was as close to acceptance, to love, as Samuel Carter could come. Mary felt tears prick her eyes. "Thank you," she said simply. "Don't thank me yet," Samuel said, but his gruffness couldn't hide the warmth. "Winter's not over, and running a ranch without Hartley's interference is its own challenge. Hope you're ready for real work now." Mary looked at Eli, saw her own fierce joy reflected in his eyes. They'd fought for this for each other, for their life, for their choices, and they'd won, against all odds. "We're ready," she said, and meant it. The future stretched before them, full of challenges and possibilities, but they'd face it together, partners in truth now, tested by fire and stronger for it. The girl who'd once climbed through a window seeking a moment's choice had become a woman who'd bring down kingdoms for love. It was enough. It was everything. It was theirs. Spring came slowly to Wyoming territory that year, fighting winter for every inch of ground. But when it finally arrived, it transformed the Carter Ranch into something from a dream green grass pushing through melting snow, wildflowers dotting the meadows, and the sound of new life everywhere as calves and foals found their legs. Mary stood on the porch of their cabin, rebuilt and expanded over the winter months. They'd moved back from the main house after the trials ended. After Josiah Hartley was sentenced to 20 years and his empire crumbled, the cabin now boasted 2 rooms instead of 1, real glass windows, and a proper kitchen built with their own hands and help from the ranch hands who'd become family. "You're up early," Eli said, joining her with 2 cups of coffee. He moved easier these days. The weight of constant threat lifted from his shoulders. "Couldn't sleep." She accepted the coffee gratefully, leaning into his warmth. "Too much happiness. Maybe I keep thinking I'll wake up and it'll all have been a dream." "If it's a dream, we're both having it." He pressed a kiss to her temple. "And I don't plan on waking up." The past months had been a whirlwind. With Hartley gone, honest businessmen had emerged from the shadows, eager to deal fairly. The ranch had prospered, contracts honored, debts paid. Even Samuel had grudgingly admitted that Mary's courage had saved them all. "Your father wants us at the main house for breakfast," Mary said. "Says he has something to discuss." Eli groaned. His discussions usually mean more work. "When has work ever scared us?" Mary turned in his arms, smiling up at him. "Besides, I think you'll want to hear this one." She was right, as usual. Samuel waited for them in his study, but for once, his expression held something other than calculation or concern. "Sit," he said, gesturing to chairs. "Both of you." They sat, exchanging curious glances. "I'm not getting younger." Samuel began without preamble. "This winter showed me that time was, I could ride fence all day and dance all night. Now," he shrugged, the gesture saying what words couldn't. "Father," Eli started, but Samuel held up a hand. "Let me finish. I built this ranch from nothing, made it what it is through blood and stubbornness. Always thought I'd die in the saddle. Leave it to you to sort out after." He looked at Mary. "But you taught me something, girl, about partnership, about building something together instead of alone." Mary felt her throat tighten, but stayed silent. "I'm not retiring." Samuel continued quickly. "Not yet, but I want to start handing over the reins, teaching you both not just how to work the land, but how to run the business, the contracts, the negotiations, the planning." His eyes fixed on Mary. "Both of you. This ranch needs more than muscle. It needs brains, and you've proved you've got plenty." "Sir," Mary began, but he cut her off with a gesture. "Don't sir me. You're family now, like it or not, and family shares the load." He pulled out a leather portfolio, thick with papers. "These are the ranch accounts, going back 20 years, time you learned how it all works." They spent the morning going through ledgers and contracts, Samuel explaining the intricate web of relationships and agreements that kept the ranch running. Mary absorbed it all like a sponge, asking questions that made both men look at her with new respect. "You've got a head for this," Samuel admitted grudgingly as they broke for lunch. "Better than Eli, truth be told." "Hey," Eli protested, but he was smiling. "I never claimed to be a businessman." "No,
his father agreed. But you married one. Seems like... After lunch, they rode out to check the herds, all three of them together. The cattle were fat and healthy after a winter of careful management, the calves strong. Jake Morrison met them at the eastern pasture, grinning broadly. "Got news," he said. "That blooded bull we bought last fall, he's been busy. Come see." They followed him to a smaller pasture where the newest calves were kept. Mary gasped at what she saw. The calves were magnificent, clearly showing their superior bloodline. "We'll make a fortune at market," Samuel breathed. "If they all grow true to form." "They will," Jake said confidently. "Best investment we ever made, buying that bull." "Second best," Eli corrected, his arm finding Mary's waist. "Best investment was $8,000 to a certain banker." Mary blushed, but Samuel actually chuckled a rare sound. "Can't argue with that, son." They were riding back when they saw the wagon approaching, dust cloud marking its progress across the prairie. Mary shaded her eyes, then straightened in her saddle. "Papa?" It was indeed John Whitfield, looking older but healthier than when she'd last seen him. He pulled up as they met him on the road, his eyes moving uncertainly between the three Carters. "Mary," he said softly. "Mr. Carter, Eli." "John," Samuel nodded. "What brings you out this way?" "Came to see my daughter, and to—" He reached into the wagon, pulling out a strongbox. "To return this—" Mary dismounted, approaching her father. "What is it?" "The money Eli paid for my debts, or what I've saved of it." John's weathered face was earnest. "I got work over in Cheyenne. Real work, at the stockyards. Been saving every penny I could. It ain't all of it. Not yet, but—" "Papa, no." Mary caught his hands. "That debt was paid. You don't owe—" "I owe my dignity," John said firmly. "My pride. Let me do this, Mary. Let me prove I'm more than a failure who sold his daughter to pay his debts." Mary looked at Eli, who nodded slowly. "We'll take it," he said, "but not as repayment, as investment. The ranch is expanding. We need good men. Work for us. John, not as a hired hand, but as a partner in the horse operation we're starting." John's eyes widened. I don't know anything about horses." "You know about hard work," Samuel said, surprising everyone. "And about getting back up when life knocks you down. That's what matters. The rest can be learned." Mary felt tears threaten as her father climbed down from the wagon, shaking hands with both Carter men. This was what she'd dreamed of but never dared hope for, not just love, but family, real family, built on respect and second chances. That evening, they held a celebration in the main house. The ranch hands came, treated as equals at Samuel's own table. Jake told stories that had everyone roaring with laughter. Even Samuel loosened enough to share tales of the ranch's early days, when everything was struggle and uncertainty. "Like now," he said, raising his glass. "Every generation faces its tests. You two faced yours and came through stronger. To Eli and Mary, may your trials be behind you and your triumphs ahead." They drank, the rough men trying not to show emotion at the old man's unprecedented softness. But Mary saw the glisten in more than one eye, felt the shift in how they looked at her. She wasn't the scandal-touched town girl anymore. She was Mary Carter, who'd faced down night riders and brought down a corrupt empire. She was theirs, and they were hers. Later, much later, she and Eli walked back to their cabin under a canopy of stars. The night was warm, full of spring promises and the sound of night birds. Mary felt contentment like a physical thing, warming her from inside. "No regrets?" Eli asked, reading her mood as he always seemed to. "How could I regret this?" She gestured at the land around them, the life they'd built. "A year ago, I was trapped, facing marriage to a man who saw me as property. Now you're stuck with a rancher who makes you dig fence posts and chase cattle," Eli teased.
Now I'm free, Mary corrected. Free to choose, every day and every day. I choose you. I choose this. She stopped walking, turning to face him. That night I climbed through your window. I was just looking for a moment of rebellion. I found a lifetime of partnership instead. You saved me too, Eli said seriously. I was dying inside, going through motions, existing but not living. You woke me up, Mary, reminded me that life was for living, not just enduring. They stood there in the starlight, two people who'd found each other against all odds and built something stronger than either could have managed alone. The ranch stretched around them, thousands of acres of possibility and challenge. Tomorrow would bring work. There were horses to train, cattle to tend, books to balance, a future to build. But tonight was theirs, earned through courage and choice, trial and triumph. Inside their cabin, the fire had died to embers. Mary stirred it back to life while Eli secured the door. Such simple, domestic actions, but precious for their ordinariness. This was what they'd fought for, not grand gestures, but quiet moments. The right to be together without shame or fear. What are you thinking? Eli asked, settling beside her on the rug before the fire. About that first night, Mary said. When you caught me spying at your door, you could have sent me away. You know, could have avoided all of this, the scandal, the danger, your father's anger, and missed the best thing that ever happened to me. Eli pulled her close. Not a chance. I think I knew even then, when I saw you standing there in the storm, like you'd stepped out of my dreams and into my life. Pretty words. Mr. Carter, Mary teased, echoing his father's earlier comment. True words. Mrs. Carter. He tilted her chin up, eyes serious. I meant what I said that night. I chose you forever. Through whatever comes, drought or plenty, struggle or ease. Forever. Forever? Mary agreed, sealing the promise with a kiss. Outside, the wind whispered through the grass, carrying the scent of spring and new beginnings. The Carter Ranch slept peacefully, its people and animals secure. In the main house, Samuel Carter sat at his desk, finally starting the letter to his eastern relatives he'd put off for months. Ready at last to share news of his son's marriage with pride instead of resignation. In the bunkhouse, Jake Morrison and the hands planned tomorrow's work, comfortable in the knowledge that the ranch was in good hands for generations to come. And in a cabin built by love and determination, two people who defied convention and chosen each other settled into sleep, wrapped in warmth and certainty. They'd been tested by fire and emerged stronger, tempered like steel in the forge of frontier life. Mary's last thought before sleep claimed her was of her mother, gone these many years. I hope you're proud, Mama, she whispered into the darkness. I found my place. I found my person. I found my purpose. The fire crackled softly, sending shadows dancing on the walls. And somewhere in those shadows, perhaps, Martha Carter and Mrs. Whitfield smiled down at their children, at the love that had bloomed in unlikely soil and grown strong enough to weather any storm. Dawn would come soon enough, bringing its duties and challenges, but for now, in this perfect moment, all was well on the Carter Ranch. The future stretched before them, bright with promise, built on the foundation of choice and courage, partnership and love. They had chosen each other in a world that tried to choose for them. They had seized their chance at happiness when propriety demanded sacrifice. And in that choosing, that seizing, they had created something precious and lasting, a love story, written not in grand gestures but in daily choices, in shared work and quiet moments, in the simple declaration that some things matter more than what the world expects. Forever, they'd promised. And in the wild heart of Wyoming territory, surrounded by mountains and grassland and endless sky, forever seemed not only possible, but inevitable. The story of the rancher's son who caught the virgin spying at his door had become legend in those parts, told around campfires and in saloons.
But the truth was both simpler and more profound than any legend. Two people had seen each other truly and chosen love over fear, partnership over possession, a future together over a safe life apart. And that choice had changed everything. In their small cabin on the vast ranch, Eli and Mary Carter slept peacefully, hands entwined even in dreams. They'd faced down storms both literal and metaphorical, had stood against powerful enemies and won. But their greatest victory was this quiet moment, this gentle peace, this life built on the bedrock of mutual respect and fierce love. The fire died to embers, then ash. The stars wheeled overhead in their eternal dance. And in the morning, when the sun painted the mountains gold and the ranch stirred to life, they would rise together to meet whatever came, secure in the knowledge that they'd already won the only battle that truly mattered, the right to choose their own path, side by side, forever. Thank you all for listening to this story. I'd love to hear where you're tuning in from. Please share in the comments below so we can connect and discuss your thoughts about Mary and Eli's journey. If you enjoyed this tale from the Old West, please subscribe to Wild West Night for more stories of love, courage, and adventure on the frontier. Don't forget to like this video and hit the hype button to help more listeners discover these stories. Your support means the world to me, and I can't wait to share more tales with you. Until next time, partners.